Although the original NBA Jam defined the genre of arcade basketball games, a slew of mediocre releases bearing the Jam name followed the fantastic Tournament Edition sequel. It's been well documented, but Acclaim, developer of the home ports of NBA Jam and its sequel, acquired the exclusive rights to the name. Their games paled in comparison to Midway's follow-ups, such as NBA Hangtime, and their attempts to turn Jam into a sim title were ill-fated. An attempted reboot in 2003, titled NBA Jam, also referred to as NBA Jam 2004, was Acclaim's last game in the series before the company closed, and so NBA Jam disappeared from the basketball gaming space. In January 2010, EA Sports announced that they had acquired the rights to the NBA Jam name and would be producing a brand new title. The announcement brought plenty of excitement, but there was also trepidation. While basketball gamers looked forward to the prospect of a new NBA Jam title, EA's reputation invited skepticism. On top of any criticism of how the corporate side of the company operated, EA's own longtime basketball game series, NBA Live, had faltered on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Additionally, the full retail release was originally a Wii exclusive, with the 360 PS3 version slated to be digital only, and tied to EA's flagship Hoops series. That's something we must acknowledge before we talk about the 2010 reboot of NBA Jam. NBA Elite 11 included a stripped-down version of NBA Jam, with the full game said to be paid downloadable content on PS3 and 360. When Elite 11 was cancelled, EA instead released NBA Jam as a standalone retail game on those consoles. It led to the misconception that EA were trying to sell a full game that was originally being given away for free, which wasn't the case. It's a misconception that still pops up over a decade later, so as you can imagine, it cast a shadow over the reboot in 2010 as well, as did NBA Elite 11's failure. It's unfortunate, as it became one of the best NBA Jams. Trey Smith, creative director on EA's NBA Jam, promised that the game would be a faithful reboot of the original series. It succeeded there, which was both a strength and a weakness for the 2010 release, but we'll get to that. Trey and his team wisely threw out the changes that Acclaim's games had attempted, and went back to basics. NBA Jam 2010 features 2-on-2 gameplay, with all of the ridiculously spectacular high-flying dunks that are a trademark of the series. A notable difference is that the over-the-top dunks can only be performed when you're on fire. In the original Jam games, great dunkers could soar into the air without being on fire, but it was a logical change. Speaking of fire, it was still attained in the traditional way. 3 consecutive baskets without the opponent scoring, with goaltending protecting a heating up streak, and goaltended shots not counting towards getting on fire. A player's abilities are boosted when they're on fire, and they're able to goaltend. Fire is extinguished after making 4 baskets, or if an opponent is able to score. Alley-oops, introduced back in NBA Hangtime, are also present. Team Fire is activated by completing 3 lobs in a row, and lasts for 25 seconds on offense. There are no infractions apart from goaltending and 24-second shot clock violations, with shoving being a viable way to steal the ball. Defenders can be eluded with a couple of basic crossovers and spin moves. Ratings effectively differentiate player skills, but aren't so rigid that a low-rated 3-point shooter can't nail a few shots from downtown, while a player with a dunk rating of 1 can still throw it down, just not as consistently. Gameplay is balanced between offense and defense, making it fun to play at both ends with minimal frustration. In short, it used all of the ingredients that made the original NBA Jam game so fun and genre-defining. It undoubtedly helped that Mark Tummel, creator of NBA Jam, acted as a consultant on the game. The game is honestly up there with any Midway Jam. The presentation and vibe is also true to the original games. The broadcast angle used for the camera, and the way that players scale in size as they move closer or further away from the near side of the court, are both authentic touches. The proportions of the players and court are spot on. The use of actual headshots with different angles and expressions differs from the use of digitized player heads, but it works extremely well, and suits the atmosphere. To that end, everything about the visual style of the game is a sensible and enjoyable take on the original aesthetic, updated for what was then the latest hardware. It succeeded where Acclaim had failed in their attempt to jump to 3D. And of course, NBA Jam 2010's presentation brought back an essential element, the commentary of Tim Kitzrow. The voice of NBA Jam was back with all of his most famous calls from "He's on fire!" to "Boom shakalaka!" Tim also had plenty of new lines that injected excitement and humour into the gameplay. You only have to play 5 minutes of any Jam game without Tim Kitzrow on commentary to realise just how much he brings to the series. Tim is an awesome guy who I had the pleasure of interviewing back in 2019, and his participation in EA's NBA Jam went a long way in making it a worthy reboot. He's a playable character too, which is only appropriate. Aiming for authenticity and recreating the traditional NBA Jam gameplay resulted in a game that holds its own against its iconic predecessors. Longtime NBA Jam gamers felt right at home, and the pick up and play factor meant that it was accessible to more casual basketball gamers as well, a staple of the NBA Jam series. It remains fun and highly playable over 10 years later. Of course, authenticity has its issues when it comes to reboots and remakes. Sometimes, gameplay mechanics and design ideas don't age well. Arcade sports games are a blast because of their simplicity, but they can also feel repetitive, boiling down to monotonous strategies against the CPU. To counteract those repetitive moves and to ensure a stimulating challenge, the AI would have to pull strings and manipulate the balance behind the scenes. This is the rubber band AI that NBA Jam is famous for, and the 2010 reboot pulled the same tricks. On one hand, it can mean exciting showdowns that aren't decided until the final buzzer. On the other hand, it can feel frustratingly contrived. It hardly ruins the game, just as it didn't ruin the originals, but it can certainly feel too, well, old school. Again, this is the potential drawback of faithful reboots and remakes. If it's aged poorly, or was always a bit of a problem, we may be left actually regretting the authenticity. Additionally, NBA Jam 2010 neglected to bring back the injury level introduced in Tournament Edition. The mechanic added challenge and strategy, and encouraged the use of substitutions. There's little reason to make subs unless you pick a bad matchup, and the CPU never swaps players mid-game. Tag mode was also left out, meaning that you can't switch control between the two players. Both sprint controls are on the left shoulder buttons, wastefully leaving the right shoulder buttons unused. The right stick acts as a secondary shoot and dribble move button, inspired by the Wii's motion controls. It's ultimately unnecessary, but to be fair, it can be easily ignored. Gripes aside, however, NBA Jam 2010 still plays extremely well, and is a great take on classic arcade basketball action. That brings us to modes. EA's NBA Jam presents us with the Classic Campaign, which we need to play through at least once in order to unlock the Remix Tour. The Classic Campaign is intended to be a throwback to the arcade ladder, and it's certainly a traditional experience. It's organised as more of a schedule than a ladder, but the basic concept is the same. Take on every NBA team until you've beaten them all. Games against legends are also sprinkled in, culminating in battles against the imposing duo of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, as well as the Stickmen. Of course, there is some rigidity to progressing through the league in this manner, rather than jumping all over the map. The bigger problem with Classic Campaign, however, is that you're locked to a single team of your choosing. In the original Jams, you could pick a new team every game while climbing the ladder, if you so chose. This kept things fresh, and also allowed you to choose a team that matched up well with your next opponent. No doubt is why a post-game screen would inform you of which team that would be. Being stuck with the same team makes Classic Campaign drier than it should be, and it's not as fun to replay in order to unlock the rewards. This is where the Remix Tour comes in. It's one of the best new features of NBA Jam 2010, turning Classic Campaign on its head through changing up the gameplay with an assortment of modifiers. The Bronze, Silver and Gold Remix challenges include 2v2 games with power-ups, Domination, in which the game is to own hotspots on the court, Elimination, a multi-round half-court game where the lowest scoring player is eliminated until only one is left, 21, a half-court game where the ball must be cleared and the target score is 21, Smash, where the goal is to damage the backboard and win by being the first to break the glass, and last, but certainly not least, the Boss Battles. Boss Battles are one-on-one half-court games against NBA legends and then current All-Stars. Each boss battle had its own gimmick, with special abilities and conditions to win. As Flash, Dwayne Wade zoomed around the court, and gameplay was also continuous. Julius Erving had a domination challenge. Shaquille O'Neal's was based on Smash. His shots damaged the glass, yours repaired it. Magic Johnson could pass and alley-oop the ball to himself, as he teleported around the court. Yao Ming had to be shrunk down to size to get the best of him. The boss battles were both challenging and extremely creative, taking place in some fantastic-looking custom arenas. Additionally, the remix challenges could be played as standalone games, as could the boss battles once they were cleared and unlocked. Contrary to Classic Campaign, there was more freedom to jump around to different games in the Remix Tour, though you still had to unlock divisions and challenges. Remix Tour also had the same drawback as Classic Campaign, locking you into using a single team. On top of all that, both modes are single player only, so no co-op play. Despite these frustrations, Remix Tour in particular brought freshness and replay value to what easily could have just been a familiar and serviceable reboot. NBA Jam 2010 also did a fine job of including a bevy of additional content. As noted, there's a good selection of legends throughout the league, adding to that classic Jam feel. They also wear era-appropriate jerseys, standing out from the crop of current players. There's an assortment of unlockable special teams and non-basketball players such as recording artists, politicians, and other personalities, as well as privileges like different basketballs, big head mode, and a retro filter. In traditional NBA Jam style, teams were unlocked with button combinations and by entering the right initials. With the emergence of DLC and paid shortcuts, such an old-school approach was novel. Indeed, as much as well-designed, properly balanced, and authentic NBA Jam-style gameplay made EA's game a great reboot and a worthy successor to the originals, it's those little touches that endeared NBA Jam 2010 to longtime fans. Even entering our initials to save progress was a nostalgic throwback to the arcade and home versions alike. At a time when basketball gamers were losing confidence in NBA Live, NBA Jam proved that EA could develop a winner on the virtual hardwood. As a result, the game was quite well received and reviewed. While the situation with NBA Elite 11 did lead to misconceptions, those who did play the game tended to really enjoy it. Unfortunately, online play was very limited on PS3 and 360, and completely absent on the Wii. While it didn't bother me personally, it was a common criticism, and understandably so. It's not as though online play was an uncommon novelty in 2010, and indeed, it was only gaining popularity among basketball gamers. The uproar wasn't as bad as it would be today, of course, especially given that it was a reboot of a 90s title where multiplayer meant being in the same room, on the same PC, console, or arcade machine. Its roots as a Wii release likely also contributed to the focus on a local multiplayer experience, rather than heavily expanding into the online arena. Of course, thanks to parsec and emulation, we've been able to simulate online play all these years later. With D4 3 hosting, we've had co-op and head-to-head sessions in NBA Jam 2010 with people in 4 different locations, including on the opposite side of the world. There's a ton of novelty in doing that, but even the traditional way of playing local multiplayer holds up just as well as solo play, if not better. This kind of fun that you find in arcade games, whether or not you're a die-hard Hoops fan, means that there'll always be a place for games like NBA Jam. Once again though, the decision to make its campaign mode single-player only was definitely a mistake. Video game remakes and reboots are always going to be risky. At their best, they bring a beloved classic into the modern age, enhancing it with new tech and design principles. At their worst, they make undesirable changes and miss the mark of what made the original so great. They can either make an awesome gaming experience available to a new generation, or spotlight aspects of gaming design that haven't aged well. If nothing else, they may leave you wishing that you were playing the original. To that point, the original NBA Jam games do still hold up very well, and if you'd prefer to play them instead of Jam 2010, Midway's best releases do stand the test of time. With that being said, I'm glad that EA Sports acquired the NBA Jam name, and were able to successfully reboot the series in 2010. As a company, EA doesn't necessarily have the best reputation in these situations, but with NBA Jam, they got it right. The new team clearly wanted to pay tribute to an iconic game and develop a successor worthy of the brand, and they made the right move in bringing Mark Tumell aboard to consult. They were also at a disadvantage thanks to the controversy around NBA Elite 11, from the shadow of its cancellation cast to misconceptions about the price of a retail release. Nevertheless, they delivered the best NBA Jam game since the 90s. As I said though, remakes and reboots have a way of spotlighting aspects that haven't aged well, or could stand to be reassessed now that technological advancements have made it viable. That is definitely true of NBA Jam 2010, but it doesn't make it a bad reboot, or a bad game period. Quite the opposite in fact. It's easily one of the best games in the entire series, making it a successful comeback that's still fun to play today. At the same time, however, it was clear that some aspects of the original games were now outdated, and that further innovation was required. Fortunately, EA weren't quite done with the NBA Jam series yet, but that's a story for another retrospective.